Here we go, the Romeo and Juliet prediction. As you know, grade 9 essays in my world need 13 to 15 quotes. You will get them here, and I'm going to match them to my prediction, but also, in case the prediction is wrong, other questions. Let's see what I've predicted. I'm hoping that it's going to be some sort of question about the effect of masculinity. That might turn up as a question about Tybalt and Mercutio, or it might turn up in Romeo's attitude to Juliet, or it might turn up in Juliet's relationship with her father. These are all ways of exploring masculinity in Elizabethan England, 1597, when Shakespeare wrote the play. We are going to start with at least a 3-part thesis, and so masculinity is associated with violence, which is encouraged by patriarchal society, because this is about control of women, but also proving your status as a man through dueling and violence. This conflates violence of defending your honour with violence in defending your position of authority over women, and therefore sexual violence is a real feature of this play. It also questions the role of marriage, where in the patriarchal society, men like Capulet can simply give away their daughters to other men. Women become the property of men, but not just women, their sexuality. It's super important in this society for women to be virgins, which is going to inform why Juliet has to behave the way she does. And then finally, it's going to link to fate. So what Shakespeare could be suggesting here is that none of this fate would happen if there weren't this kind of masculinity in Verona. Let's crack in to the first quote. So we've got "my naked weapon is out" in the conversation between Samson and Gregory. Now, why on earth does Shakespeare start with that? Well, he starts with comedy. He gets the audience laughing, and then he undermines that humour, because what are they laughing about? Yes, okay, it's a penis joke, it's very funny, they're running around with their swords pretending that they're penises. Oh, how hilarious. But it's a weapon to use to kill people. And so the symbolism is quite sinister, that masculinity is dangerous to women. Now, the next thing we get is that they're looking forward to thrusting the maids to the wall. A maid isn't just a young woman, it's also a symbol for virginity. Maidenhead was virginity. And so this is rape. And in particular, they're looking for virgins to rape, because virginity is prized much higher than sex, because it is something that you can symbolically possess. Yeah, you can only give it away once, or you can only lose it once. Look at that language of possession again. Lose or give. And so this masculine world treats women not just as objects, but their virginity as prizes to be taken. Now, it's not so funny, but the audience is not necessarily aware, because the action on the stage before the duel is funny. So he's playing a game, is Shakespeare, trying to make us feel secure, but then he's going to flip that humour into tragedy. When we first meet Romeo, we discover that he has been in love with Rosaline, but how does he demonstrate that love? In his own words, he has been bribing her with saint-seducing gold. Oh, come on, have sex with me. Look at all my little gold rings that I'm going to give you, and the necklaces. Go on, come on, look at me. I'll pay you. Basically, that's what he's saying. Now, Rosaline has to resist, because if she loses her virginity, she is no longer marriageable. She can't be sold, as it were, to the highest bidder, because she has to be a virgin on her wedding day. Now, this is a patriarchal rule imposed by men. Can't believe women imposed this rule. Oh gosh, well, we can't ever have sex until we're married. Why would they do that? Well, actually, there is a very strong reason why they do that, because they wouldn't want to get pregnant. But this is not something that Shakespeare himself agreed with. He got Anne Hathaway pregnant well before they were married, and then they had to get married. Many people wonder whether that was deliberate in order to allow the two families to marry them. So, Shakespeare is not a big fan of this patriarchal control. The friar says to Romeo, "Love lies not truly in their hearts, but in their eyes." He's talking about Romeo, but he's also talking about all of men in this society. That this love that they express is just another way of trying to have sex with women. And this hints that the root cause of the tragedy is sexual desire that cannot be satisfied because you can only have sex in this society once you're married. And this seems to be quite damaging, at least in the way it's presented in the play. Romeo has this wonderful, speech about love. Yes, delightfully poetic, but when we come down to it, what does Romeo say? She's going back off to bed, and he says, "Wilt thou leave me so unsatisfied?" Now, he pretends that he means he wants some exchange of token or some word from her that they're now going to be a thing. But actually, what Juliet thinks is, "Oh, you're just asking me for sex now, aren't you?" And she says, "What satisfaction canst thou have tonight?" Because she knows once she gives away her virginity, she can't be married off to someone of high rank. Someone like Paris, for example. So she is now taking control of the situation in the only way she can, which is what leads to the tragedy. If it weren't for this patriarchal control of sex and virginity, they could do what teenagers do. But they can't. And therefore, she manoeuvres him into marrying her. Because this patriarchal society says that's the only way you're going to get what you want. She only has value as a commodity to be sold off to the highest bidder. Her rebellion is to say, well, at least I'm going to choose who I marry. I'm not going to let my parents do it. So this is another problem of the patriarchal society. Your parents, if you're rich, choose your husband or choose your wife. And that is the root cause of the tragedy. If they'd never got married, none of the rest of the tragedy would have happened. So Shakespeare's critique of this tragedy is that it's a patriarchal society that forces Juliet to act on love by marrying behind her parents' back. Now, the friar I've introduced here because he is the antithesis of Romeo and of Juliet. So Romeo and Juliet are rebelling against their parents with no thought of the consequences whatsoever. This is Juliet's family, says, right, the Montagues, that's the one family you can't associate with, and vice versa. And both of them are super attracted to the fact that they are sleeping with the enemy, as it were. In fact, Rosaline, she's a Capulet. Romeo Montague, first tries to have an affair with her. Forbidden fruit, rebelling against his parents. And so their union is like that. It is a rebellion against the parents. So, what does the friar say? Well, he says, I'm going to marry you because this alliance may so happy prove to end the enmity of your parents and end up in pure love. So, he's got a noble reason for marrying them. He's going to end the feud, which is affecting so many people in Verona. And the feud is caused by patriarchal values and men squaring up to each other in defence of family honour. So he is like an antidote to male power. However, his solution is secret. And as long as the solution is secret, it can't work. This can only work when the news of the marriage between Romeo and Juliet becomes public. And the friar is going to fail to do that. And the reason I'm including the friar, not only is he the antidote to masculinity, but he could come up in a separate question. So I've got two friar quotes for you that you'll be able to use. Now we have another version of masculinity, which is Mercutio. And so he is desperate for Romeo's attention. Plenty of quotes that prove that. The main one is his reaction at the end of the party, or the ball I should say, when Romeo is off trying to seduce Juliet. Mercutio was on his own. Well, at least he's without Romeo, and he wants to find him, and so he summons him like a magician with a spell, and he mentions Rosaline's quivering thigh. Why? Well, his point is the only thing that would keep Romeo away from him is sex with a woman. There's a lot of tension here, so Baz Luhrmann interpreted this as Mercutio actually being secretly in love with Romeo and unable to express it to him, and therefore we have sexual jealousy. You don't have to take that interpretation, but he's definitely attached to Romeo as his best friend. His best friend is not there. He is, as far as Mercutio is concerned, chasing sex. And this is why he says, I conjure thee. So to conjure was to create a spell, but also to raise up. Another penis joke that Shakespeare is giving us. Again, giving us humour, but underneath it is going to be the tragedy, because it is Romeo's desire for Juliet that is obviously going to lead to their deaths. Mercutio is suggesting that any interest that Romeo has in a woman is entirely sexual. And Shakespeare plays with that all the way through, so that even at the end, as we'll see, the romantic death of the two lovers is heavily sexualized. And he's asking us, do we really believe in this love story, or is it driven by young people who are just coping with new physical changes with hormones and new emotions with desire? So, Romeo, once he's married, if he were in love, really ought to be a little bit more honourable in the way that he describes Juliet. Now, he doesn't tell anyone that he's just married Juliet, because obviously they need to keep that secret. But when he finally rejoins Mercutio the next day, he says, why then is my pump well flowered? Shakespeare giving us another penis joke. So pump is the penis, the flower is slang for virginity, because virginity was your flower, and when you lost your virginity, you were deflowered. And so what he's saying is, yep, found me some virgins last night, had a really good time, I'm a lad. Why is he doing that? Well, Shakespeare isn't just after the laughs, he's also trying to point out that this humour about sex, in which men boast about taking things from women, this violent possession, is the same violence that's destroying society. And this is the patriarchal values that treat women as property and their virginity as prizes. So we can see all the way through the play how critical Shakespeare is of patriarchal values. We can see this again with the nurse. So the nurse recalls this time when her husband had watched Juliet. Juliet's 3. She falls on her front and gets a lump on her head, which is the size of an egg, she says. And her husband turns round and says to Juliet, little 3-year-old kid, thou wilt fall backwards when thou hast more wit. In other words, when you know what you're about, you'll fall on your back, because that is the position that you will have sex in. Therefore, you will attract men. So children are sexualized from a really young age here, and the male perspective is that you're a woman, that's what you're for. And the nurse reinforces this. She thinks it's hilarious. So another problem with the patriarchal society is children from a very, very young age are conditioned to believe men have this power and control over women, and women are sexual objects. This, again, is going to lead to the tragedy, because once they are married, if Romeo and Juliet don't have sex, the marriage isn't consummated, and this would mean the tragedy wouldn't happen, because when Capulet comes along and says you're going to marry Paris, there would be no problem. The marriage would not be official until they've had sex together, until they've consummated it. It's only when they've consummated it that Juliet's marriage to Paris would become bigamous. It's only then that her soul would go to hell, and therefore she can't marry Paris. You know, because the sensible option would be the nurse's solution. Yeah, don't tell anyone that you're already married to Romeo, just go marry Paris. But no, she can't do that. Why? Because they've given in to their sexual desire. So, young girls trained to have this sexual desire. Another way we find that out, of course, is that Juliet's mother was younger than her when she gave birth to Juliet. So Juliet's mother must now be 27. Juliet is 2 weeks away from being 14. Incredibly young to be a parent. Incredibly young to be having sex and actually giving birth. The other aspect of masculinity is Tybalt. So Mercutio, we've had this sexualized idea. With Tybalt, there's no sex going on at all. It's just complete violence and this idea of male honour. So he stands up to Capulet at the ball. Capulet says, I know Montague's here, but we're just going to leave it. You're not going to cause a disturbance at my party. We know that Tybalt won't accept that. And at the end he says, by the stock and honour of my kin, to strike him, Romeo, dead, I hold it not a sin. So, masculinity here is more important than religion, because obviously it is a sin to kill Romeo. But Tybalt is saying God's instruction is less important than being a man in patriarchal society, defending my family honour. Again, this idea that masculinity is out of control in this world. And we'll see that, of course, with the fight between Tybalt and Mercutio. Now, we next get to Capulet saying to Juliet, I've arranged this brilliant marriage. Now, before we demonise Capulet, because obviously he's a bit of a villain, let's just consider the facts as they would be in 1597. Capulet's role is to marry his daughter to someone with the best social status that he can. Not only will that set her up for life, and then her children and her children's children and so on, it will also secure the position of his own family. So if he marries Juliet to Paris, he's a count, they now have a much greater influence in Verona, and therefore over the Montagues, than just as Capulets on their own. The other exciting thing is that Juliet is going to be happy in terms of values in 1597. She's got the prize guy, Paris. And Paris seems like, well, he's young. I mean, this is a big deal because Capulet himself was much older when he married Juliet's mother. So not only have they found her account, he's young and he's handsome. So as far as he's concerned, he's been like the best dad in the world. And suddenly Juliet is saying, no, I'm not going to do this. It's ridiculous. I'd rather die. So we should have some sympathy for him. Except what stops us having sympathy for him is that this whole problem is patriarchal. He's marrying her off when at the beginning of the play he was telling Paris, she's too young. Let's wait till she's 16 and with her 2 more summers in her prime. So patriarchy and the male power in patriarchy, that is the root of the problem. That's what Shakespeare keeps coming back to. And so this is exposed when we get his line to her, fettle your fine joints gainst Thursday next. So this is the language of pottery. To fettle is to shape a clay object, and her joints, obviously, clay pots have joints. If you've ever made a clay cup or a clay bowl, you'll have done this. You've got to smooth over the joints where the clay joins so that it's nice and smooth. But he's obviously referring to the joints of her body. We've got the fricative Fs, which obviously remind us of the F word, because it's reproduction that he's talking about here. So get your joints ready for your wedding night, because you're going to be going to bed with Paris, and it's going to be on Thursday. But of course, the fricatives are kind of violent. That's why we have the F word as our swear word. It conveys violence, and this violence is directed to his daughter, and it's linked entirely to her sexuality. So we can see that the male attitude towards women's sex is violent and controlling. Then he says to her, I will give you to my friend, hang, beg, starve, die in the streets. This is a dramatisation of what parental male control is like of the women. Because, you know, if he disowns her, she's a rich woman, well, rich girl, Juliet. She's never learned anything that will make her independent because she's just bred to marry. So, you know, if she went out on the streets, she would be helpless and would have to beg or starve or turn to prostitution. He's literally threatening to throw her out and ruin her life. Again, she is a commodity and a possession. This then leads to her taking the friar's drug, which is going to mimic death, but also the friar doesn't know if it will actually cause death. So she's taking the risk of dying, and Shakespeare's saying that is because of male control. If Capulet hadn't done that, she wouldn't have then had to take this potion. Then obviously Romeo wouldn't have thought she was dead. The death of the two lovers wouldn't have occurred. It occurs because of Capulet's violent language and violent threats. Okay, now we jump back in time to look at Mercutio fighting Tybalt, because that's another cause of the tragedy. Mercutio, whether or not he's sexually attracted to Romeo, is attracted to the idea of family honour. This is what he has in common with Tybalt. And so he says, when Romeo won't fight Tybalt, "O vile, dishonourable submission," dishonouring the family name. So in this society, violence is celebrated. If you're a man, you have to resort to violence to maintain your status in society. And we see that at the beginning of the feud, where old Capulet and old Montague are talking about "bring me my sword" and trying to join in. Now, there is a difference though, because Tybalt was thinking he's not going to hold it a sin to kill Romeo, but Mercutio tells us quite clearly, and Tybalt quite clearly, that this is still boastful behaviour. So although he wants to defend the honour of being a man and Romeo's honour, he doesn't want a fight to the death. Okay, so he says to Tybalt that "I'm just going to take one of your 9 lives." There was a famous character in stories at the time that would have been told to children where Tiber, or Tybalt, was a cat who always outwitted the other animals. So Mercutio is calling, it's not Capulet, he's calling Tybalt a cat, but it's a reference that everyone would have picked up on. And he's saying, look, I'm only going to have one of your 9 lives. So yeah, I'm going to get a bit of blood from you, but that's it. Yeah, chill. We're just going to have this fight. I'm going to beat you. If I'm unlucky enough not to beat you, you're just going to take a bit of blood from me. Yeah, you're going to cut me up some. And then I'm going to have like a scar, which I'll be able to show off, like I'm a brave dude that I am. Yeah, I've had loads of battles. You get the idea. So Mercutio is telling Tybalt, this is not a fight to the death. Okay? But Tybalt won't accept that. And this is a natural accident that's going to happen in a society which arms its young men with swords. And that comes back to the link between patriarchy and violence. This is what Shakespeare's saying. We can't have a society dominated by men in this way. It's just too dangerous. Once Tybalt has been killed by Romeo, Romeo doesn't take responsibility. And this is another aspect of his masculinity. He doesn't say, God, I really shouldn't have done that. Let's see what I'm going to do next to sort this out. He says, oh, I am fortune's fool. Like, I could never have predicted this would be a problem. Fate has intervened and set things up in such a way that I've ended up killing somebody. Who could have imagined that was possible? Like, oh, nothing to do with me. This is laughable, isn't it? And Shakespeare's disdain is also conveyed in the fricatives again. Yeah, like the swear word. Shakespeare can't believe, well, he can because he's written the play, but you know what I mean. He can't believe in Romeo's view here. So yes, we're supposed to be sympathetic to him, but also we're also supposed to be highly critical of his view. And just in case we're not, we look at the words that he says to justify this. He talks about Juliet and says, thy beauty hath made me effeminate. So marrying you, being in love with you, has turned me into a woman. And so, in order to turn myself into a man, I have no choice but to go and kill someone. Well, not just anyone. I'm going to kill Tybalt because he killed my mate Mercutio. This is absurd. What Shakespeare is suggesting is that Romeo should have done the reverse. Yeah, he should have publicised the marriage between Romeo and Juliet. They should have confessed it to the parents. He should have been more of a man. But his view of masculinity is that it involves violence rather than responsibility. And I think Shakespeare wants us to be highly critical of this. And even if he doesn't, you can be. I am. Now, we get to the tragedy of Juliet. She's just waking up, as you know, having taken this potion that kept her asleep for, is it 44 hours? Can't remember. So don't put anything you can't remember in the play. And he's dead. She can't get any poison from his lips, he's drunk it all. And so she says, "Oh, happy dagger, this is thy sheath." So she picks up Romeo's dagger and kills herself with it, stabbing herself in the heart or the stomach. But heavily, heavily sexualized language. The dagger, symbolic of the penis. The sheath, what the dagger goes into. So there's your sheath and you put the dagger in so that the blade doesn't cut you as you're wearing it on your belt. But she has now become the sheath for the dagger. Easy metaphor for sex again. What's Shakespeare saying? Well, he's saying that sex is what has killed her. Symbolically, that's what's underpinned it all. And in particular, the male control of sex through the patriarchal society. We can go a step further because I've got to get the friar in here. Remember, he was the antidote to society's view of patriarchal violence. But crucially, the friar is a Catholic. And as you know, Catholics were frowned upon in Elizabethan England since Henry VIII outlawed them and said, look, we're just changing our national religion. I'm now going to be the head of the church. Catholics, bad. So, this is set in Verona, Italy. Everyone's a Catholic. And so Shakespeare is ridiculing Veronese society, but also the Catholics. And so ultimately, the friar also doesn't take responsibility. He goes to intercept Romeo when he's going to find Juliet dead, but he gets there too late. Romeo's dead. Juliet wakes up, and instead of taking her away, he says, I've got this great plan. Instead of me telling your parents about the marriage with Romeo, which would kind of sort everything out again, but not for the friar, I'm going to send you to a nunnery. You can become a nun and never have sex again. Now, that's hardly likely to appeal to a 14-year-old who has just got married and had sex with her husband and, as she tells us, had a wonderful time. No, you're going to have to give up on this forever. No more marriage, no more men, no more sex. Go and be a nun forever. Hardly something that's going to delight her. And then he just leaves her there. He doesn't take her with him to protect her. He just leaves her there, which then allows her to kill herself. In the source material, the friar is condemned as a villain in the source poem. But here, Shakespeare kind of lets the friar off. So what he's suggesting here is even the friar's cowardice, that version of masculinity, even a cowardly male is better than the patriarchal society we've got. That's quite a damning verdict, isn't it? Even cowardice is better than bravery because look where it's got us in society. There you have it, 13 quotations. Can you apply that to a question on Capulet? Well, there's been quite a few on Capulet that you can use, and obviously he embodies the patriarchal society. Can you do it if it's Capulet's relationship with Juliet? I think you can, given Juliet's understandable reactions, which I've explained here. You can definitely do it if the question is on Mercutio and Tybalt, because I've mentioned them frequently. Let's find out if the prediction comes true.